And we brought case after case after case and really got nowhere with those cases. It was really sad. We would win at the trial level. We had this wonderful judge who really got it. And he got that the USDA, U.S. Department of Agriculture, was not doing its job. It was not regulating the industry. It had been bought by the industry. It was being regulated by the industry, and it wasn't doing what it should have done to protect the animals. But then when we'd win the case at the trial level, and then we'd go up to the appellate level, and the judges would say, you're private citizens who are probably anti-research. They wouldn't come out and say that, but that was, if you read between the lines on their opinions. No, the USDA is doing its job. Mind your own business. Go away.
Hi, my name is Amy.
And my name is James.
And this is How I Learned to Love Shrimp, a podcast about promising ways to help animals and build the animal advocacy movement. Known affectionately as the mother of animal law, this week's guest, Joyce Tischler, has over 45 years of experience advocating for animal rights through law in the US. Starting off in 1979 by co-founding the Animal Legal Defense Fund, where Joyce served as executive director for 25 years, we hear about the first cases Joyce worked on, as well as her bold decision to take on the US Navy. Joyce now lectures at the Lewis and Clark Law School in the Centre for Animal Law, specialising in industrial animal agriculture, teaching students both locally and internationally. We hear from Joyce on some great case study examples of effective campaigning and her decision to switch from circumstantial cases to prioritising cases that developed the legal theory. With a wealth of experience and knowledge in this area, if you're even remotely interested in how a career in law can help animals or want to learn more about this specific approach, then this episode is for you. Hi everyone, we're joined today by Joyce Tischler, Professor of Practice in Animal Law at the Centre for Animal Law Studies at the Lewis and Clark Law School in Oregon in the US. Joyce has been a voice for animals since 1979 when she co-founded the Animal Legal Defense Fund, serving as their executive director for 25 years. She's known affectionately as the mother of animal law, and we're delighted that she joins us for the conversation today. Welcome, Joyce.
Thank you. Thank you, Amy. And thank you, James. Good to be here.
We'd love to know what's something you've changed your mind on recently. I think it happens to us quite frequently, ideally something, in the animal advocacy world. Is there something that comes to mind for you?
I've been doing this for 45 years now, so that's been a good portion of my life.
Sure.
And when I first went into doing animal work, I thought, as did everyone around me, we're going to change the world. We're going to just bring this revolution about, and animals are suffering and we're going to end it. And that's naive, and it's the kind of thing that you do when you're starting out. It gets you motivated, it keeps you motivated. But in 45 years, I've realized that it takes generations to change society. Right. Animals are in pain, they are suffering right now. And for most of them, there's nothing I can do about that. The billions of chickens who are stuck in horrific circumstances, I can't save them. What I can do is build a foundation, and then the next generation after me will work from that foundation and build on that, and then we'll build on that. But if you look at social movements, honestly, it takes generations for change to occur, and that's very frustrating, very painful to have to live with.
Do you think that's unique to the law space, I guess, because your wins are maybe so few and far between or take so long to go through the system that potentially comparatively to something like a corporate campaign or like a diet change initiative where you're seeing results, maybe daily, weekly, monthly. Is it something specific to law, do you think, that has you feeling like that?
Not at all. I think it's specific to social movements. And let's talk about dietary change. Here we are pushing veganism. And we're making strides, but we've only got, 2% of the population being vegan. And, when you think about it, I think about it with many of my friends are carnivores, many of my closest friends, and they are compassionate, kind, decent people, and yet they're still eating animals. And it's hard to create change for other people or ask them to change themselves. I think changing is one of the hardest things people do, and they avoid it like the plague. So that's one thing. I mean, with all the work that we've been doing over decades, the amount of change we've seen because of pushback on the status quo, because people don't like to change, because with animals, their use is ubiquitous. They are used in so many ways. I mean, if you just think about the average person's day, they get up and they brush their teeth with toothpaste that was tested on animals, and then they eat eggs and bacon. Okay, we all know where that comes from. And then they're wearing shoes that are made of leather, and, it goes on and on and on. So the use of animals is baked into our society, and changing that is going to take generations.
So obviously we're going to try and unpack as much as we can, but we're talking about a huge history of animal law for both you, Joyce, and also in the US. I would really recommend, which we will link in the show notes, Joyce has written 2 papers on the history of animal law. Calls it a brief history, but they're decent documents and really informative, actually, and go into a lot of detail. So we'll link those, and I do recommend further reading on that. But back in the 1970s then, so there was this kind of pivotal moment where US attorneys and law students came together to establish this concept of what we now know to be animal rights. What do you think really influenced these professionals at that time to start taking action for animals?
The lawyers put together or created the animal law. Animal rights was already happening. And
Sure.
as a result of the 1975 publication, the first publication of Animal Liberation by Peter Singer, which a lot of us read and were heavily influenced by. But we were also a product of the 1960s in the U.S., which was really a very difficult but creative time in our history. The Vietnam War was raging. A lot of us grew up on anti-war demonstrations. I certainly did. I was planning them when I was in high school. And we were children of the 60s. We were people who thought that you could change the world, that social change was something that could create mass change in our society. So we came into the animal sphere from civil rights, feminism, other social movements, and then we were applying that to animals. So that's where we were coming from, and that's why we were talking about, okay, yes, you talk about animal rights as a philosophical argument, but how do you translate that into a legal argument and convince a judge in a courtroom? That's a whole different avenue.
Right.
Was it because you guys were all in the legal field previously and that you chose like the legal avenue for change rather than pursuing, maybe you were inspired by civil rights movement and they're organizing to the NAACP or something else? Like, why did you pick the legal route as the kind of first entryway in?
When you're a hammer, everything looks like a nail. We were all quite young, actually, when we first started, when we had our first board of directors. A lot of us I had only been out of law school for a few years. So yes, we were working as lawyers. David Favor was working as a law professor. Steve Wise had his own firm in Boston. We were not seasoned lawyers. We were not 15 years worth of legal practice. It was more like 3, 4, 5 years of legal practice that each of us had. And we brought that to bear, and we thought lawyers understand power. Lawyers seek power. They know when they have it. They know when they don't have it. They know how to negotiate. We wanted to bring animals to the negotiating table with the skill set that we have. We didn't see ourselves as the ultimate answer. We saw ourselves as one answer to add to all of the other answers that there are in terms of creating change for animals. And that's actually something that's developed over time for me, is my understanding of how to create change for the animals or in any social movement. And I'll give you my sphere my sphere theory. If you look at the problems, and in the middle, let's call it just the problem of factory farming, which I called concentrated animal feeding operations, or CAFOs. And that's the term I use when I'm teaching in class. So if you put the word CAFO in the midst of my sphere and you look at all of the negative impacts that a CAFO causes. There's obviously the harm to the animals, but there's the harm to the environment, the soil degradation, the water pollution, the air pollution, climate change, then the harm to the human beings, the neighbors, the people who are forced to live next to these CAFOs and slaughterhouses, the people who work in those places who are treated very badly. Then you look at the public health issues, food safety issues, the overuse of antibiotics, all of these issues, and I may be leaving one or two out at the moment. When you look at all of those harms, you can send the arrow back into the sphere. Those are all the ways that we should be attacking the system. And each of those ways, whether you're a lawyer or a program person or an educator or a farm worker, you can be attacking this massive system from every possible angle. And they all work together, I think, to weaken the system.
When do you think it is advantageous to focus on tackling CAFOs from a purely like animal law or like animal point of view versus some of the other issues like you mentioned around, let's say, air pollution or water pollution or climate change? Like, do you think there's some like special benefit or effectiveness by going through animals, or actually is it the opposite? You want to go through other issues and maybe have more standing legally?
I think we should all be using the skill sets that we have to attack from every angle. So, as I said earlier, I don't think law is the most important way to go. It's simply the tool that I use because I'm a lawyer. But if you are a communicator, if you are a movie star, you can use your communication skills and your popularity. Use that. If you are a writer, write books, write articles. If you're an educator, as I now am, you educate people so that they can go out and do wonderful things. And that's one of the most exciting things. And I'm segueing off, but what really excites me now is teaching these people who are coming to us from all over the world. I mean, our students come from South America, North America, Australia, New Zealand, Europe, Africa, Asia. And so we teach them everything we know about animal law. We work with them to encourage them to follow their passion, whether their passion is farmed animals or research or wildlife, whatever. And then we send them back to their countries, and it's exciting to see the things that they accomplish. My heart just swells when because we stay in touch with these folks, and to see what they're doing in their countries. Wow.
It's so great that it's now so global, that it's an online course and you can reach people all over the world.
Yes. We're teaching, at CALS, we teach 25 separate courses, all related to animal law. A few of them are factory farming. The one I teach on industrial animal agriculture law. I try to teach people how this came about, what the problems are. And I don't just teach the animal welfare problems. I teach all environmental, public health, the workers, the nuisance cases. And then once they understand what the problem is and how it came about and what supports it, then we talk about how to challenge it, how to get out there and just attack this system from every possible angle.
In the article you talk, in the brief history of animal law, you talk about a meetup in 1981 where there was around 60 people that attended, and it seems to have been a really kind of pivotal moment. Can you talk about the significance of that particular meetup?
I think as animal activists, we each, maybe some of us don't, but I certainly started out feeling very isolated, for my entire life up to when I walked into that meeting in 1981. I was just little weird Joyce who loved animals, pat her on the head and send her off. Yeah, there goes Joyce. And when I walked into that room and there were 59 other people who shared my passion for animals, it was like coming out of a cave and seeing the light for the first time in my life. There were other people like me. And that was such it's a moment that I've never forgotten, how it felt. We were encouraged, we being Larry Kesenick and I, we were the co-founders of, at that time, the group was called Attorneys for Animal Rights, and we later changed it to Animal Legal Defense Fund. We were encouraged to come to this meeting and go national, like we couldn't even fill a rugby team and we were going to go national. So we did. We announced that Attorneys for Animal Rights was going national, and the people that I met at that conference, that 2-day conference, Steve Wise, David Favor, Peter Lovenheim, people who we then invited to be on our national board of directors. And once we did that, once we had our little group, we really began to talk to each other, formed friendships that have lasted for a lifetime in most cases. And we talked to each other about, so what do we want to do here? Do we want to, hang on, okay, this is Teddy.
Hi, Teddy.
For people who are listening, Joyce's
Yes.
dog is just sat in her lap.
We love an animal cameo.
Yes. We were meeting, back then, there weren't computers yet, and there wasn't no internet, so we were talking on the telephone for hours and hours and hours, and we're talking about, what do we want to do? What do we want to achieve? We started fairly soon after that. I think we wrote our first white paper, and a white paper is a proposal in a sense, where you identify what your mission is and what your goals are, and then you take that and you think about it as, okay, well, what kind of work are we going to do? Are we going to focus on wildlife or companion animals? It really wasn't until the late 90s that people in the U.S. started focusing on farmed animals. We're way behind the Europeans. So really, my first focus was on animals used in research and wildlife. Those were the cases that were, the wildlife cases were coming to us. And so we were taking whatever came in the door in the first couple of years.
It's a really good pitch for, those in-person meetups. I still feel as though that happens now. How you feel when you've left a conference, you walk in feeling kind of siloed. A lot of us work remotely, and then you join those people and you're like, oh yeah, we're all like, there's so many people working across the globe on these incredible projects. I'm not just by myself in the middle of nowhere, like trying to make a difference. I think it just really shows the benefit of conferences that we are really fortunate to still have now.
I think so. We just, a couple of weeks ago, had our annual conference in Portland, Oregon, our animal law conference that's put on by Center for Animal Law Studies and the ALDF. And the energy in the room was exhilarating, and it lasted the entire weekend. It was marvelous. And meeting so many people, seeing old friends, seeing former students, meeting new people. It was just wonderful and exciting, and I came away totally exhausted.
Yeah, it's always like part exhaustion, part really like reinvigorated and energized. It's always like half and half for me.
Right, exactly.
Yeah, and on those first few cases, you said, what were the first few cases you guys handled, and what was the reaction of, I guess, judges or other lawyers to those cases, and kind of how did things pan out?
The earliest cases were things that popped up and we got involved. So one of the first cases involved a dog whose owner had put in her will that when the owner died, the dog was to be euthanized.
Oh, wow.
And that was very common then. And it was thought by that owner to be a kindness because she didn't think her dog could adapt to a new owner. She was quite wrong. Her dog adapted very well to a new owner. I should say this, the owner committed suicide, and her body was found in her apartment in San Francisco along with the dog. The dog was taken to the San Francisco SPCA, and the then president of the SPCA refused to give the dog over to the executor for the estate. He said this dog should have the right that every other stray dog has to be placed in a new home. And ultimately, the court went along with that. It was quite a celebrated case. People were writing in and saying, I'll adopt this dog.
Oh.
And the dog ended up spending the rest of her life with the president of the SPCA. She went everywhere with him, and she would work a room. She'd go from one person to the other, and she had the best years of her life. From the legal perspective, the issue was, as a matter of public policy, should a dog be killed when the owner says in their will that the dog should be killed? And the answer was no, not at all. Another case that came to us was the Burroughs case, and that was my first major case where, again, it involved killing. The U.S. Navy has a weapons testing center in the middle of the Mojave Desert in Southern California, which I think is kind of ironic. It's the Navy, but they're shooting off bombs and artillery in the middle of the desert. In the middle of that desert are many burros. Burros are donkeys. And when the charcoalers and the miners had been in that area, the burros had carried the heavy equipment. And when the humans left that area, they basically just abandoned the burros, left them to die. But burros are very smart, tenacious, good survivors, and they didn't die. They proliferated in the desert. And so here's the Navy with this naval weapons testing center in the middle of the desert. And they had a landing strip where their airplanes take off and land, which was fine, except that at nighttime, the burros would come onto the landing strip because it was warm from the airplanes and there was water there. And they're gray. You can't see them. So the Navy was rightfully concerned that a burro would down a plane. That was fine. Their answer was, let's shoot them every weekend until we kill 5,000 of them, and that will resolve the problem. So we understood what the problem was, but we said, well, that's really not a good resolution, you know.
One solution.
How about building a fence? You know?
Wow.
Oh no.
That's crazy, Joyce. You can't do that.
So we went to court. I went to court, actually. I pulled an all-nighter. We found out about this on a Thursday. They were going to start shooting again. They had already shot 500 and killed them the weekend before, so they were going to start shooting again on Saturday.
How did you even find out? I assume this is like obviously military, so not super public information.
Someone from the military base called the outside. They called the Animal Protection Institute in Sacramento, and the Animal Protection Institute called us and said, "What can you do?" And I said, "Well, I've got to do something."
I'm working on it.
I didn't even know what a burro was, but I knew they were going to be dead. So I pulled an all-nighter. I got into court on Friday morning, went before a judge. We had to call the Navy. Their people showed up. And the judge gave us what's called a temporary restraining order, a TRO, which basically stopped the Navy from doing that until we could have a full hearing. As you can imagine, the Navy was really not happy about that.
Yeah.
But we spent the next 8 months getting to know each other. Oddly enough, we would go out to the Naval Weapons Testing Center, meet with them, talk to them, show them films of how burros could be humanely removed from the area. We got to trust each other. We got to know each other. When we finally went back to court 8 months later, the judge said to us, "Go leave the court, go make a settlement, and bring it back to me." And we did. We did. We were willing to remove burros as needed, humanely, and allow them to be adopted out, and no more burros were killed. So, now what that case did was it saved the lives of thousands of burros. Yay! But it also created an opportunity for me that had not existed before. And that's that the Animal Protection Center came to me, and they were very happy, and they asked, "What can we do for you?" If you ever get asked that question, answer it carefully, because you don't get asked that question often in life. And I told them about this dream I had to leave the law firm and do the animal protection, animal rights work full time. And so they gave us a grant of $6,000, which enabled me to leave my job and live on $1,000 a month, which I could sort of at that time, and to become the first employee of the Animal Legal Defense Fund, doing everything. I was litigating, fundraising, cleaning the toilets, typing the pleadings.
It's a pretty epic case to have started out on, to have gone from a fairly pedestrian dog case to then taking on the US Navy.
Yeah.
It's just incredible when I was reading about it.
When you're young, as I was, I'd only been out of law school for a few years. It was like, I just didn't, I was fearless. Oh, right. Yeah, take on the Navy. I don't care. Yeah, I'm right. And, you lose a lot of these cases. I may be right, but, you asked how judges dealt with us at first. They laughed at us. They thought we were bizarre.
When did you see that start to change? Or maybe it hasn't changed yet, but was there a period over the last 30 or 40 years when people actually took the issue seriously rather than dismissing it out of hand?
Yeah. I mean, I couldn't pinpoint a date, but yeah, the more judges heard about these cases, and that probably took a solid couple of decades, the more they heard about these cases, and we were careful to be really grown up and to act like lawyers, to act like serious lawyers, and not to be outlandish or silly, or we were often having to convince them that we really weren't asking for all that much. Oh, it's not all that different what we're asking you for. Because especially at the trial level, judges don't like to be that courageous. They don't want to get their decisions overturned. So you have to try to convince them that, oh, it's not, you're not going out on a limb. You're just taking a few steps here. And sometimes that works. And a lot of the times, we lost a lot of our early cases. We found judges saying, emotionally, I'm with you. I'm sorry that animals are trapped in leg hold traps. That was one of our mid-'80s cases. But the law is not with you. Go to the legislature and change the law.
And then when things like that happened, is that what you did, or because you were a hammer, you couldn't necessarily do that kind of advocacy?
We didn't have the capacity. I mean, when we first started, we were thinking about litigation, and we were thinking about hiring lawyers to do more litigation or paying outside lawyers to do litigation. We felt that there were other organizations that could do the lobbying and legislation. So it took years before ALDF actually started a legislative arm. I need to stop because I don't know if you can hear the cat.
A cat, yeah.
Yeah. If you could see, there's a chicken standing there and a cat over here and the dog over here. Welcome to my life.
Oh my God, that's amazing.
Cat has been let out. Cat is happy. Chicken may follow cat. And one more dog coming up. Oh, okay.
Wow.
And
How many animals do you have, Joyce?
2 dogs, 1 cat, and 14 chickens, most of whom don't come in the house. But Carlotta, who's now headed out the door, comes in the house.
Love it.
Wow. What a fun place. I'm jealous.
Yeah, you want to come clean?
Not about that bit. I want to visit for like an hour maybe.
So you talked about taking on the cases that came to you, so kind of very circumstantial at that point. Was that the case for quite a while, that it was just taking on any cases that came in? Did you pick and choose? Were you intentionally picking some that you felt like were maybe easier wins? What did that process look like?
For the first, I'd say 2-3 years, we relied on cases coming to us. But at the same time, we were all reading different laws from different states. We were reading books that existed at that time about what the problems were. So we felt that we were becoming the experts. And we also believed in something called major impact litigation. And what that is that the average lawyer is in their office and the client comes in and says, blah, 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 these are the facts. What can you do? Can you represent me? Can you win this case? The lawyer researches the law and tells the client yes or no, or, analyzes and then gives the client advice as to how strong the case is. We wanted to move away from that because we felt like we knew more than the people coming to us about what was winnable, about how to take a deeper dive and create broader-based change in society. We didn't want to spend our entire careers nibbling around the edges. Okay, we wanted to get at the heart of things. And so, as I said, we wrote white papers. We analyzed what the problems were. We looked at what the laws were. And so we were thinking bigger, and within a few years, we began developing our own cases. And we would still take cases coming from potential clients, but that was not as important as developing a major impact lawsuit, which is a lawsuit that's going to go to the heart of the matter and try to create broad-based change.
What's an example of something that you'd consider like one of those major impact lawsuits?
One case that we took in the mid-'80s involved challenging in New York State, under New York State law, the steel-jawed leg hold trap as cruel. And the basis of the case was to say, this is cruel. It violates anti-cruelty laws in New York State. And we want the judge to halt the use of the leg hold trap by issuing an injunction. An injunction says, stop what you're doing. So we were asking the court to enjoin the leg hold trap. And Jolene Marion, who was then our staff attorney in New York, put together really a brilliant factual case coming from veterinarians who had treated dogs and cats who'd been caught in leg hold traps. We had a veterinarian who wrote a pleading in which he described the physiological impact on the animal once the trap closes, the pain, the destruction of tissue, starvation, being attacked by other animals. So we built this case, and at the end of it, what the judge said was, this is a barbaric device that harms animals greatly, but you're in the wrong place. You need to go to the legislature and ask them to change the law, because under the law as it exists, the trap is used. It's not been outlawed, and therefore I can't find against it. I have to assume that, yes, on the one hand, there are anti-cruelty laws, but on the other hand, there are these wildlife laws that allow the trap. And when there are two sets of laws that conflict, I can't choose one over the other. So that was one of our early major impact lawsuits that we brought. And then we just kept going from there with other major impact lawsuits involving challenging removal of wild horses from federal lands so that they could graze cattle there. I'm sorry, I'm laughing, but that's one of the impacts of grazing cattle, is that wildlife get eliminated. We went after the U.S. Department of Agriculture in a series of cases in which we were attempting to get them to enforce the Federal Animal Welfare Act. What does that mean? Animals who are used in research are subject to a federal law called the Federal Animal Welfare Act. Bit of an oxymoron because their welfare is not really attended to. And there are things such as mandatory veterinary care, mandatory cage cleaning. We tried to get group housing for primates instead of housing them individually. Use of anesthesia and analgesics, which used to not be done. So we were trying to breathe life into this federal law that's really a very weak federal law. And we brought case after case after case and really got nowhere with those cases. It was really sad. We would win at the trial level. We had this wonderful judge who really got it. And he got that the USDA, U.S. Department of Agriculture, was not doing its job. It was not regulating the industry. It had been bought by the industry. It was being regulated by the industry, and it wasn't doing what it should have done to protect the animals. But then when we'd win the case at the trial level, and then we'd go up to the appellate level, and the judges would say, your private citizens who are probably anti-research, they wouldn't come out and say that, but that was, if you read between the lines on their opinions. No, the USDA is doing its job. Mind your own business. Go away. So that was a series of cases which really were some of the most depressing cases of my career, because we couldn't do anything really significant to help those animals. If I'm handling a case for a client who, a human client who's in business and who lost $20,000 at the end of the day, it doesn't really matter to me that much. It matters to my client, but not to me. But when I'm handling a case where animals' lives are at stake and their well-being, that to me is worth my time. That's what I want to be doing with my time. So I feel like a very lucky lawyer who got to live out her passion. Most lawyers do not.
How did you, I guess, deal with that almost like failure, or taking these cases to courts and the judges basically not treating them the same way, or basically the tactic not working? How did you kind of overcome that kind of hurdle and find the motivation to keep going for such a long time?
I wasn't abusing drugs or drinking, so I wasn't.
It's a great answer to any question.
Your Honor.
I just felt like I was right. Just felt that I was right. And for better or worse, we were what the animals had. So do your best. wipe yourself off, pick yourself up, and get back into it, sucker.
I love that. It's very simple.
Yeah, it is. Don't overthink it.
So you were appointed to lead the Animal Legal Defence Fund, co-founded, as you said in your intro, served as the executive director for 25 years. You had this starting budget of $12,000, which is incredible. How did it feel to be that kind of leading an organization at that time? Presumably also a fairly groundbreaking position for a woman at that time, would you say?
You make it sound so important, and
It is.
It is, absolutely.
I got the job because I was the only one willing to work for that pittance of a salary.
Right.
No one else was willing to leave their jobs that were making them a lot more money. They felt guilty, but I was willing to do it, and they let me do it. So it wasn't like I had a lot of competition at the time.
Right.
We often find that women are willing to work for less in the animal movement, and I'm sure elsewhere. The women are the majority of the workers, and I guess I started at the top, but what I was doing was everything, and I kept wondering why I couldn't do it better. I was litigating, I was, typing my own pleadings. I was the marketing person. I was writing the newsletters. I was doing the fundraising, and I didn't know how to do any of that stuff. I learned on the job. And so it was frustrating in that I wish I could have learned faster and done it better and come into starting ALDF with more money in our bank account, because there were a lot of very lean years where we didn't have more than 2 months of income in the bank. We were wondering, okay, and I would wake up in the middle of the night in a cold sweat saying, oh boy, am I going to be able to pay the rent in 3 months?
Oh, wow.
And were you being funded by grants, or was this like individual donors at that time?
We got that initial $6,000 grant from the Animal Protection Institute, which was really a godsend. And then I went back to them, and they said the next year that they would give us another 6,000.
Okay.
And we started sending out letters to people we knew, individuals, asking them to support us. But I was living on credit cards, and I had to take on a second job on the weekends in order to pay the rent. Finally, around 1984, we hired a firm that does direct mail consulting, direct mail income production. And it took a couple of years until the expenses were outweighed by the profits. And around 1985, 1986, we finally had enough income so that we had a base of income from which to draw. And we were doing direct marketing, direct mail. And then we could branch out and start to begin the other kinds of fundraising that one has to do. But we were all lawyers. The original board of directors of ALDF, which I was on the first year, and then I left when I became an employee. It was all lawyers, and none of them knew how to fundraise. So we figured it out eventually, but we were very poor for a long time. It's not, again, today, a group that's starting out can get a few $100,000 off the bat by some donor. The donors were not aware of us at that time. So that's been a major change. The movement as it is today has light years more money than we had at that time.
Which is obviously amazing. And hopefully, it's still not enough. So hopefully we'll have more in the future as well. So fingers crossed. Thanks to everyone who's doing all that fundraising work. And obviously the animal law field within education and universities has changed a lot over the past couple of decades. I think the number of classes has grown, I think from around 9 in the year 2000 to around over 100 now. Over your time, I guess maybe more in the educating field, how have you seen the change in animal law within universities in terms of focus of animals or just the interest of the students? Yeah, how has that evolved?
It's built very well, I think. The first animal law class was a one-off. It was only taught once. It was taught in 1977, actually.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, in New York City. And then it wasn't taught again. And then there were a few people teaching animal law at say 9 or so law schools, and those were basically self-motivated attorneys who came in. They're called adjuncts. They're not part of faculty. They just come into the school to teach this one course and then they leave. And so a few of our members were doing that, and it wasn't really growing very much. What happened in 2000 was that the first casebook was published. A casebook is how law students learn. It's what the professor tells them they have to purchase. They have to go home. They have to read 50 pages a night or 100 pages a night and then come in and discuss the cases. So that's the process. Once the casebook was in hand, then we began going to law schools and bringing them this casebook. We needed several things to get them to teach a course. We needed a petition or a show of student interest. Yes, you will have 30 students in this class. We needed a casebook. Here's how you're going to teach it. We needed to address law school administrators as professionals. And then we needed a teacher to teach the class, which wasn't all that hard because one of our attorney members, we were growing at that point, and we now had several hundred attorney members in various parts of the U.S.
When you say attorney members, what was that relationship? Because I assume they weren't staff at that stage. So what were they?
There was a very tiny staff of 2 attorneys for a while until about the late 80s. Around 87 is when we got some more attorney staff. But there was me and Jolene Marion, the woman I mentioned earlier, who handled that Lakehold trap case. And we had, I think, a secretary or 2, and we had free rent in some place. And Jolene had free rent in an office in Manhattan. So we were tiny, but we had members, people who joined as attorney members, and they would get our newsletter, and we would hold a conference, and we would invite everyone to come to the conference. So that's what membership was with us. It was of value because basically we were the only group out there at that time that was talking about animal law, and we were reporting on cases that were happening in different parts of the country. We were of value to that small but growing group of attorneys who were like little weird Joyce, finding that, oh, there's other people like me out there. I want to be in touch with them.
Yeah, makes sense.
When you're advising students, or if you were to advise students considering their career options, when do you think it makes sense to go into law to help animals versus maybe pursuing a different avenue, whether that's like policy or corporate work or diet change, as we alluded to before?
Some of my legal colleagues look askance at me saying this, but I think law is one avenue. It's not the only avenue, and it may not be the best avenue.
Yeah.
When I graduated law school, I had loans worth $15,000, which I was able to pay off at a small amount per month for over a 10-year period. Students graduating from law school today, and I'm using U.S. dollars here, have $100,000, maybe $150,000 in debt. So I don't say go to law school lightly. You're going to come out owing a mortgage. And is there going to be a job for you? The field has grown. After that casebook came out and we started pushing animal law classes, it went from 9 to today we have around 160 law schools that are teaching animal law, maybe every other year, but at least they're teaching it. But there weren't many jobs for those students coming out of law school then. There are a lot more jobs now, but there are a lot more students who want the jobs. So will you have a job? One of the things that we do talk a lot to students about is what their career could be like once they get out of Lewis and Clark and graduate. We talk about going into the federal government, going into work for the U.S. Department of Agriculture or the Bureau of Land Management or Department of Interior. That would be a tough job to do because a lot of what's happening in those agencies is the exact opposite of what you want to happen. We talk about, and our students often do clerkships for the big nonprofit agencies in the U.S. and sometimes overseas. So for Humane Society of the U.S., PETA, Mercy for Animals, Humane League, our students are working for all of those different groups and hoping to get jobs with them. And there are jobs, but again, not as many as the students we have. And so there are a lot of avenues, and something that James and I have talked about is going into becoming a legislator or working on the staff of a legislator, both either federal or state, as another way to go, as a way to enter into mainstream America and influence them. So there are jobs. It's the first thing our students always ask of us. We spend a lot of time mentoring them and giving and networking with them and helping them to create that job when they leave. But it may be a lobbying job. It may not be. It may not be a litigation job. Very few people actually litigate in the law. People think lawyers as all litigators, but actually it's only a small percentage of people who go into litigation. You can use those legal skills in all kinds of ways.
Thank you for plugging that, the government job opportunities. I will share that resource, but in essence, there's a program that we've been trying out called Animal Policy Careers, which is exactly that, Joyce, in that there's lots of talented law students and sadly not that many animal law nonprofit jobs. So it's like, how do we use those skills, those resources, that expertise to help animals? And I think one avenue, which is great because we don't have to pay for it necessarily, is if they work in the federal government, a government agency, so on and so forth. And my colleague Spencer can provide some career coaching. So I will plug that resource for those people that are interested.
Thank you.
What are the kinds of traits do you think make someone a really good animal lawyer?
A really good animal lawyer will be like any really good lawyer. A person will have a logical mind, will be very articulate and able to communicate well, will understand that they need to communicate to a specific audience and that communication changes based on the audience you're talking to. When you're talking to a judge, you speak in a certain way and you write in a certain way. When you're speaking to an audience such as we are now, you speak very differently, but you try to get into the mind of the audience and think about what's going to convince them to do what you want them to do. So you're logical, you're articulate, you're intelligent, and passionate about the lives and interests of animals, that they matter. They matter to you so much that you're just going to do the best possible job you can do to try to win that case and win that argument. And one more thing, tenacity. Tenacity is a really good quality to have because we still do lose a lot, and you just have to be the little engine that could. Chuck.
I think that resilience piece is so important. I remember Edie Bowles talks about this a lot, about how most of her job is reading, just reading, tons of reading.
Yes.
Edie is going through a great court case at the moment with the Humane League talking about the breed of broiler chickens. And there was a live feed where you could watch the proceedings at the Royal Court. And one of my ex-colleagues was like, oh yeah, like tune into the live feed. And honestly, I was there for about 5 minutes and was so like bored. I had no idea what was happening. It was just this like drawl of like information that I just didn't understand, that I was like, this is not exciting to watch. I'm expecting like a TV, like courtroom drama, like I object. And, it was absolutely none of that. I was missold. So actually, I think that resilience piece is really important, and just that relentlessness of just like, okay, this one hasn't worked out, as you said before, Joyce, really well, like next one, like on to the next.
Cry your tears and move on.
Right.
Speaking of moving on, we can move on to another topic that, I guess I'm curious to get your thoughts on. You said at the beginning of your time for ALDF, it was very much focused on companion animals and also wildlife, but then you said now you teach a course at the Centre for Animal Law Studies on industrial animal agricultural law. And like, how did that focus shift for you? Like, why did you choose to, I guess, take this on as maybe your main work? I don't know if it is your main work over the previous work you were doing.
I have focused on many areas as an animal lawyer. I've built up expertise and sometimes the companion animal work. I mean, I love companion animals. I live with them. I respect them. But the companion animal work, I grew tired of pretty quickly. Veterinary malpractice cases, which are very difficult, very technical. You need a veterinarian one or more veterinarians who will testify that malpractice actually occurred. That's a very high standard. It takes a long time. You're in court for, 3 years. And landlord-tenant cases where, tenants being kicked out because they've got a cat, dangerous dog cases. For those companion animal cases, I felt like I'm just nibbling at the edges.
Yeah.
I'm not getting at the heart of the matter when I take these cases. There are attorneys who are in private practice who spend all their time in those cases, and bless those people. I'm glad they're doing it. We need more of them because there are a gazillion of those cases. But I just felt like, I'm not going to create the change I want to create doing those cases. Wildlife cases, I did like those cases. I still think they're very worthwhile taking. A lot of those were based on environmental laws, so they were sort of the easier cases to make progress with. But I thought, again, that others could do them, that environmental groups could do them, and were in some cases, not as broadly as I would wish. I spent many years focused on animals and research, and I told you about those USDA cases. Those cases kind of broke my heart that we couldn't create change in a way that I felt was more meaningful to the animals. I mean, with the use of animals in research, back in the 80s, there was a widespread debate about abolition versus regulation. And that's something we always debate about in the movement, isn't it? Are you going to just give them bigger cages, or are you going to, destroy the cages? And that's a worthwhile argument always to have amongst ourselves and within ourselves. It just really broke my heart that we could barely get them bigger cages, that we couldn't get even the most simple improvements for them. And I just personally rather burnt out on it.
Yeah.
And it's work worth doing. Ultimately, what may help the use of animals in research to decrease is that technology will replace them. Cell cultures, tissue cultures, computer models. Hopefully that's going to replace, it'd be lovely if it replaced all, but I think it will replace a number of animals that are currently being used. There used to be this annual gathering of the leaders of the movement. This is way back. It probably started in the mid 80s, and I don't know when it ended or if it has ended. But every year we'd get together, all of us in a room, which in and of itself was an improvement because we were in a
Yeah.
room looking at each other and talking to one another. And right about the mid 90s, I guess, when Henry Spira was still alive, he would come every year. And Henry had spent most of his career focused on the use of animals in research. And then one year he showed up and he said, the greatest number of animals by far are the animals who are raised for food. Henry had a very monotone voice, and they're getting treated miserable, and there's billions of them, and you should all stop what you're working on now, and you should start working on this. And I remember the first year sitting there and listening, yeah, Henry, that's what you're working on, and we should all stop what we're doing and work. I mean, that's such a familiar song in the movement. What I'm doing is important. What you're doing is not. Come and join me if you want a meaningful life. And then the next year he came back and he gave the same speech, billions of animals, and you should all be working on this. And I thought, oh, God, Henry. I didn't listen. And then the third year he came back and he made the same speech. And
Wow.
I woke up. I said, oh, maybe Henry's on to something. And that was when I started to become interested in the plight of farmed animals. And up until then, there was Farm Sanctuary, there was Humane Farming Association, there was Farm, and that was it. There really were very few groups in the U.S. working on farmed animal issues. Around 1999, a group of us, a large group of us, got together in New York to ask ourselves, what can we do? It was a seriously annoying meeting because most people were throwing up their hands and saying, well, there's no federal law. There's absolutely no federal law for how you treat farmed animals. All we've got is state anti-cruelty laws. We have no law to use. From the perspective of the lawyers, we can't do anything. But this was a broad-based group. Which animals do we choose to work on was one of the main fights. Karen Davis was still alive then, United Poultry Concerns, and she got up, and Karen was an intense person. She said, if you're not going to work for the birds, for the poultry, I'm not going to get involved. I mean,
Wow.
it was a meeting that was a firestorm, and at the end of it, nothing came out of it. We couldn't agree on anything. But as a result of that meeting, a smaller group got together, which was HSUS, Farm Sanctuary, ALDF, and HSUS had success doing something called state ballot initiative work. What that is at the state level in, I don't know, how many states in the U.S.? 25? you can bypass the legislature by developing a proposal for a bill, a proposed law. If you get enough signatures, if you get enough people to sign up that this should be brought directly to the voters, in California, you need 600,000 people to sign it, this measure. And it's very stressful. You have to get that in a short period of time. You draft this bill, you get 600,000 people to say, yes, this we think it should go on the ballot for the general election. And then you have a campaign in which you're trying to convince people to vote for this bill. So the first time we did that was in Florida, and it was a bill that banned sow gestation crates. There's not much of a pork industry in Florida. HSUS did some polling and thought we might be able to win this. So we drafted the bill, got the signatures, and won, banned sow gestation crates in Florida. And then that began a campaign which lasted, it's still going on. But, when you talk about how do you create change, we knew we couldn't go to Congress to get a federal law to protect farmed animals. It wasn't going to happen because Congress, both parties, are controlled by big ag, the industry itself, Purdue, Smithfield, Tyson. They control Congress. They control presidents. They control at the state level. So that wasn't going to happen. So we finally had a tool starting in 2000 where we could go state by state by state, which had in the states that had this ballot initiative process. And every state we went to, we were challenging some of the most egregious things, the sow gestation crates, the calf crates, the intensive confinement of the calves, and battery cages. Those were the three major things that we went after. And from state to state to state, we won in every single state. It was the first time that the agriculture industry was faced with a successful campaign, and it blindsided them. They didn't know what to do. And so in a number of states, we were able to create these massive improvements. The egg-laying chicken industry fought it for a long time and then finally said, we'll give up. I mean, they haven't totally given up, but because that's only half the states that have the ballot initiative process.
Sure.
So the others don't necessarily have to deal with it. And so the chicken industry or the egg industry finally decided to say, okay, we'll get them out of cages. And that process has been, going on. But so it wasn't a federal law. It was a state level law that was voted on by the voters, by the citizens, the consumers, not by industry. So we did an end run around the industry, and that's how the change occurred. Some people have probably heard of the California propositions, Prop 2 and Prop 12. What Prop 12 or Proposition 12 did, California in Prop 2 had banned the use of the battery cage, the use of sow gestation crates, and the use of intensive confinement crates for calves. Prop 12 applied that out of state. If you wanted to sell eggs or pork or veal in the state of California, you had to meet the standards of California. And as you can imagine, all hell broke loose at that because farmers, I hate to call them farmers, industry from outside of the state of California didn't want to have to spend the money to take the sows out of gestation crates or the chickens out of battery cages. So lawsuits ensued. One went all the way up to the U.S. Supreme Court, brought by the National Pork Producers Council. And the U.S. Supreme Court basically did not overturn the California law, Prop 12. And we're still fighting with the pork industry. They really are big mad that dare to suggest that sows should not spend their lives in coffins and crates that are the size of coffins for them.
It's interesting to hear that so much progress was made for farmed animals, because when you said you were working in like the lab stuff and, struggling to get basic provisions for like primates, and then you were burnt out by that and then chose from Henry's influence like farmed animals, to me that feels like even further away, that actually going into that field is even more complex. There's so many different species and animals that need our support, but actually hearing you talk about those early successes, I imagine was much more motivating, that actually there were some wins to be had, that you were just, that was like hitting a brick wall from the lab space. One question I was interested in was whether you always were representing like the animal perspective, because, for example, we just recently interviewed Tom Harris, who was instrumental in the SHAT campaign, which was also over in the US. And I wonder if did you ever represent people who charges were being brought against because of their actions for animals? Was that also in your remit?
I did a little bit of that. I'm not a criminal defense attorney. I'm a civil litigator, so I didn't do too much of that. And I would only do it if I had criminal defense attorneys working with me, because I didn't want to do something incompetent.
Sure.
In the 80s, that was the heyday of the mass demonstrations in the U.S. So you'd get hundreds of people in Washington, D.C. and New York and San Francisco and Los Angeles. And those people would march, and they would march to a research lab, or they would go, sort of a hunt saboteur type thing. And they would risk arrest, and you'd have 100 people who were arrested, and you had to get them out of jail, which wasn't all that hard. Then you had to find out who wanted to plea bargain and who wanted to actually go to trial. So yes, we did some of that. For me, it never was all that satisfying, because and this is just me, I want to do work that directly impacts the animals. And this was a little too distant for me. And I also felt like, well, this is basic criminal defense work. That could be done by any lawyer, who's a criminal defense attorney. So I wasn't all that excited about it, but other lawyers are, thank goodness, and they do represent activists. And yeah, that's well worth doing.
You kind of hinted at it before, where you ran into roadblocks where the course essentially said, this is not a legal issue, you should try to change policy. So I'm kind of curious, how much of legal efforts today or over your life is actually, you trying to enforce the law, you trying to reinterpret the law, you trying to change it? Like, what do you see as the primary goal? Or if you had to prioritize, like, what's the main things you're trying to achieve?
Boy, good question. When you have absolutely no law, as we had absolutely no federal, every time I say that, I shock myself. We had absolutely no federal law to protect farmed animals during the 99% of the time that they are living in industrial facilities. There is a federal law. It's called the Humane Standards of Slaughter Act. Of course, there are no humane standards, but okay, Congress felt good when they put that word in there. And then there's a humane transport law, which is completely unenforced, but sets certain basic standards for animals during transport in trucks. And that was it. So you have this blank slate of law, or lack of law, when they're being raised, and then you have these two very ineffective laws, the humane transport and the humane slaughter, during transport and slaughter. So what does one do when one is faced with that? And let's just take that limited example, because there's state law and there's all sorts of other things. You have no federal law? Well, you need to start looking for creative ways to attack what's being done. And so one of the things that's developed is the use of consumer protection laws. So, for example, Tyson was advertising that their chicken, they never used antibiotics, no antibiotics ever. It was put on the packages. And they were actually sued by two other industry leaders, Sanderson's and Purdue, sued Tyson saying, we're doing the same thing as you're doing. We know we use antibiotics. We know you use antibiotics. So you're misleading the consumers, and we're going to sue you for misleading the consumers. So that's an unrelated, that law is completely unrelated to animals. And yet we could use consumer protection law to try to benefit animals in a roundabout way, because Tyson ultimately had to stop using that misleading advertising. And so if there is an organic producer, although the animal conditions are not much better, the chickens I adopted all came from an organic facility. And so they weren't using antibiotics. They were just letting them die if they got sick. So I'm sorry, that's me off on a tangent. But so when you have no law, you get creative, and then you also turn to the ballot initiative type of process to try to create law. When you've got bad law, yes, what you're trying to do is force the agency that's supposed to enforce that law to give some teeth to it. That's another approach. Again, as I've been in this movement over the years, I've become more open to, throw it all on the wall, see what sticks, and if it sticks, use it and move forward. Create new causes of action. If they work, yay. It's sort of a rolling process. One of the causes of action that's worked, there's a marvelous set of cases that coming out of North Carolina in which people who are forced to live near CAFOs, live near these massive barns that have thousands and thousands of animals in them. Those barns, those CAFOs, were built in eastern North Carolina, which is traditionally where a lot of people of color, poor people of color, live. A lot of people who, when slavery ended, moved to North Carolina or moved to this part of North Carolina, and their families have lived there for generations. And then in the 1980s and 90s, Smithfield Corporation, through its subsidiary, Murphy Brown, built hundreds of these massive CAFOs, literally in the backyards of these poor people of color, Black people, Hispanic people. Why? Because Smithfield assumed that those people didn't have the wherewithal to fight back. Finally, 500 of those residents filed nuisance suits in 26 separate cases, nuisance suits against Smithfield Murphy Brown, and one brought them to juries, and the juries sided with the people who lived there, saying, these people, you have impacted their lives, you have polluted their air, you have polluted their water, they're getting diseases, their children are getting asthma. This is disgusting. You should have to pay these people what you owe them. Great use of nuisance cases. Now what we're seeing is that states are strengthening what's called a right to farm law. And the right to farm law says that the farmer has the right to do what they do. Yes, it's going to be stinky. Yes, it's going to smell. And the people who live nearby, well, too bad. And that's happening. That's the industry fighting back now. It's a constant ping pong. It's
like an
constant
arms race.
Yeah, we do something, then they do something, then we do something. And you just, tenacity, resilience, you just have to keep, banging away. So, but my point was that was a really good creative way to try to fight against what Smithfield did. What Smithfield did to these people was absolutely egregious, and it continues to do that. These people are still living, with polluted water, polluted air, shit being rained on, literally shit being rained on their houses, on their cars, from this CAFO system, this factory farming system.
And it's kind of scary that the industry also, normally when you're working like with a law trying to change something, you don't have necessarily a mass industry trying to push that from the other side with like millions of dollars trying to like change that. I think that's also a really scary part of this process.
Yeah, I mean, I don't get scared by it. I get frustrated. I have never had a case in which I fight it. When I was young and naive, I thought, I am so right that I'm going to file this lawsuit, and the people on the other side are going to say, of course, you're right. I will change my ways. Never once in my entire career has that happened. They come back and I'm the bad guy, or ALDF or CALS or whomever. We're the bad guys. We are anti-research. We are crazy, radical, whatever you want to call us. We're the bad guy, and they have every right to keep sows in gestation crates because that's the way it's done. And then they'll even tell the public, oh, they're safer in those gestation crates. And I have a slide that I use, and it's someone from the National Pork Producers Council saying, so what? A sow is in a cage for her entire life. Did anyone ask the sow if she's unhappy? Oh, you bastard. Oh, you bastard. How could you even think that? And what's nice is that, as animal activists, we are passionate people and we're diverse. Some people really think that the only way to make change is to get out there and demonstrate and rah, go out there and demonstrate. And some people think writing books is the only way. So there's plenty of us to do all of those different approaches. Don't question your approach unless it really is bringing about bad things. But if you're making some headway, keep doing what you're doing. It doesn't have to be law. It could be Physicians Committee for Responsible Medicine. Do it as a doctor. Do it as a nurse. Psychologists. This movement is in grave need of psychologists. Try to cure each of us.
Do you think that comes from feeling as though people need autonomy in order to have sustainability in the space and avoid burnout? Because I think some people would argue, especially effective altruists, that we should be focusing time and energy on the most effective solutions, most effective strategies, the most number of animals, rather than maybe what your preference would be in terms of how to tackle this issue. Do you feel like, from your perspective, it plays a role in how long someone stays on this topic if they're passionate about how they're doing the work?
Boy, I think it varies by person to person. I don't mean to suggest that I don't want to be effective. And as the years went by at ALDF, we set up policies internally to assure that we were being as effective as possible and using the donors' money as effectively as possible.
Right.
One of the things we did quite early on was we set up something called a Project and Litigation Review Committee, and that's an idea I got from Earth Justice way back before they were Earth Justice. And that is that every time I wanted to take a lawsuit or bring a lawsuit, I would have to go before this committee of litigators who were on our board of directors, and I would have to prove my case to them. I would have to show them what my research was. How strong is this case? Do we think we can win? How many animals are we going to impact? What's the number of animals? Is it going to be broad-based change? So I'd have to go through a number of factors, and they would decide. And that took it off my shoulders in the sense that I wasn't the one deciding anymore, because when you get involved in a case, you kind of get pulled in emotionally.
Right.
Animals are suffering. I really need to take this case. Well, maybe I can't win it, but maybe we could do something. And so it's good to have an unbiased group of people, who would say to me, Joyce, yeah, that looks like a really good case. Or Joyce, you're going to have to let that one go.
Yeah.
So we were always trying to strategically look at what we were doing, and we did strategic planning. We've done that for many years, or they continue to do that. And at CAL's Center for Animal Law Study, today most groups, I think, do strategic planning, and it's a marvelous, marvelous thing to do, to really think through: am I being effective? Is this the best use of the monies? Am I doing something that people are asking me to do, but it really isn't a good use of our time? So having that kind of process, I think, is incredibly important. But I also think it's important to be creative. We're still early on in the animal rights, animal protection, animal law fields, and we need to be creative. We need to keep trying things and then evaluate. You try, you evaluate. Is this working? Is this pushing the peanut forward, as Henry Spear used to say? Our job is to push the peanut forward. If it's not pushing the peanut forward, try something else.
Yeah, absolutely.
Are there any particular legal strategies or even particular cases that you're most excited about right now?
This is an older case, but I'd like to mention it because I think it's a really brilliant campaign and case. And it was HSUS, Humane Society of the U.S., that brought it. One of the things that's now done, and one of the chief ways to get information about what's happening inside of the CAFO system, because normally the CAFOs, factory farms, are on private property. We don't have the right to go into that. And slaughterhouses are on private property. So how do you get in? And the way that groups often get in is to send someone who's their investigator, being paid by them, to these facilities to apply for a job. And this is what happened with HSUS. They sent an undercover investigator into a facility in California, a slaughterhouse. And that person was there for 7 weeks, taking videos, gathering information. and finding that it was a regular practice as cows were delivered to this facility. There would be cows who were downed cows. And downed cows, the cause of that is that dairy cows have been bred so badly. They've been bred for such high production. I mean, 22,000 gallons of milk per year, and oftentimes kept in a stanchion where they can't move around. These cows get lame, they get mastitis, they get other reproductive issues. And by the time they're 2 years old, they're either too lame or too sick to even walk into the slaughterhouse. And that's where most what are called downed cows come from. It's from the dairy industry. So regularly at this facility, cows would be in the truck. They couldn't stand up. And so what the workers were taught and told to do by management was to do whatever you have to do, basically torture the cow to get her to stand up and walk into the facility, into the slaughterhouse, so that we can then kill her and her carcass can be sold for meat. There were U.S. Department of Agriculture inspectors always at the site. Somehow, remarkably, they never saw this happening. And the HSUS investigator saw it and recorded it, brought it back to HSUS after the 7 weeks. HSUS took the video. They brought it to the local prosecutor's office. And the prosecutor sat with it for a period of time, probably was never going to do anything with it. So then, and this is where it starts to get really creative and masterful. HSUS didn't stop there. There's a big organization. They have lawyers on staff who are working with program people and figuring out a campaign that was bigger than just, let's take the video and release it to the public. They then did release the video to the public, the videos of cows being tortured. And they didn't just, go to some little Iowa farm town newspaper. They went to the Washington Post. They went to the big media. And this came out, shocked a lot of people. People were shocked by this. And people were calling for the U.S. Department of Agriculture, do something. Why aren't you going after this place? And of course, the U.S. Department of Agriculture, as I said just now, they had 5 to 7 inspectors at this place every day. It was embarrassing for them. So they did an inspection, an investigation of the situation, and they ended up doing the most massive recall in American history. 700,000 pounds of beef were recalled. Now, HSUS also did was that they looked at the contracts that this slaughterhouse had. Now, this slaughterhouse was providing beef for school lunches. Okay, kids were eating this beef, for prisons, for elderly establishments. And because when a downed cow goes into the food system, that cow might be really sick. That cow might have cancer. That cow might have mad cow disease. So now it becomes a public health issue.
Right.
HSUS built on that. Okay. And that was what led to the recall. HSUS also brought it to Congress. You need to hold hearings about what's happening. Again, they I keep saying, hit them in every angle. Then HSUS filed what's called a qui tam lawsuit. And a qui tam lawsuit is a lawsuit in which you tell the court that someone who has a contract with the federal government, and this slaughterhouse had a massive contract with the federal government to be feeding people in prisons and school lunches. As part of that contract, they had to make the statement that the animals who came to their slaughterhouse were humanely treated. These videos showed the opposite. And so the qui tam action moved forward. Basically, the qui tam action tells the court that this slaughterhouse was misleading the federal government, and the federal government should get its money back. So hitting them hard where it really hurt. The U.S. Department of Justice saw, oh, wait a minute, we got a good case here. So they came in. It wasn't just this nonprofit agency. Now it was the U.S. Department of Justice, which is a massive, powerful agency in the U.S. The case took from around 2008 to around 2013 until it finally settled. The slaughterhouse ended up closing down, went bankrupt, couldn't even pay the masses of liability that that were found against it. It was a very, very successful case and campaign from all of these angles. I love that case. I teach that case to my students. I say, think beyond just getting video and releasing it to the public. Think about what else you could do.
And so you're writing a new casebook currently covering animal welfare, environmental, worker justice. We look forward to seeing that come into fruition.
This will be the first casebook on industrial animal agriculture law. And the goal is to get it taught not only by animal law professors, but by environmental law professors. We want to get this. We're still at a really early stage. The environmental movement, it's just beginning to recognize that the CAFO system is an issue that they should be involved in. I mean, for 20 years, we've been begging them to get involved. And just within the past 5 years, now the big environmental groups are getting involved in this issue, which thank goodness, hey, that's marvelous. Let's build a bigger tent, build a bigger umbrella or whatever.
To what extent do you think the law leads culture, or maybe culture leads the law? There's research that we'll link that shows that public opinion can often influence Supreme Court decisions, but the evidence is slightly less clear for the role of the Supreme Court on public opinion. What's your take when it comes to animal advocacy?
Yeah, there's a lot that's been written about that vis-a-vis social movements in general. From what I've read and what I've seen, I think it's a bit of a dance, more of a waltz or a cha-cha, where if you're too far ahead of your partner, they're just going to stumble and fall. If you're too far ahead of the courts, which are made up of judges who are members of society, you're not going to get them to go with you. So you have to build a base of public support and education before you go into court. Or it's a dance. You are swaying to and fro, so to speak. And so as you are teaching our society that, what it is to be a bird, a chicken in a battery cage, and why that bird really is suffering and why that bird needs to be taken out of that cage, you're also, judges read newspapers, judges watch TV, judges watch documentaries, maybe not the ones we're making, but maybe they are. So they're learning. And then in court, when you're in court, you are teaching the judges as you're going through the case. You're teaching them about the subject matter, about what a chicken feels, what a chicken thinks. The chickens, they're not that smart, but they're not that dumb. They do suffer greatly. So you are teaching through the case, you are teaching society around the judge, and it's a process. So yes, public opinion does impact courts. Public opinion also impacts the producers, the industry. When Smithfield was lying, saying that it was getting the sows out of gestation crates completely, and it was lying to the public, it's now being sued in D.C. because of that lie. And that's a great case. And it was saying, we're doing it not because it's more humane. No, they would never say that. They said, oh, well, that's what the consumers want.
Right, so pulling it back.
Yeah, that's what the consumers want. And yes, industry at least says, that we give the consumers what they want. They may be lying about that. They may be, trying to convince us that they are, in fact, taking pigs out of gestation crates when they're not. But the same thing with those ballot initiatives, state by state. It was the voters. It was not the legislature. The legislature had refused to pass a law that would ban gestation crates or ban battery cages. The voters, the consumers, passed those laws. So that's something that we always need to be aware of is to use the power of consumers when we possibly can.
Nice. And then to round off, we can do 3 relatively quick fire questions. And the first one is, I guess, what's one bit of news that you're excited about or grateful to hear recently?
I get excited about the alt meat industry, to be honest, because I feel like it may make things change a little bit faster than otherwise they would. I get excited by the work I'm doing now, to be quite honest. At the Center for Animal Law Studies, we've got 25 separate courses. We've got a student group that supports the students who are there. We've got a law review, the Animal Law Review. We've got an annual conference. So when people come there, there's community. and they go through what little weird Joyce did in 1981. It's like, wow, there's all these people who are interested in what I'm interested in. And we've got people coming to us from really all over the world. And then we've got this separate online program, which is like 5 times as large as the in-person program, because it's instead of coming to Portland for 1 year to study with us or being in the law school for 3 years, the online people take a 2-year course that's asynchronous, so they can take it if they're in Taiwan or if they're in Sydney, or if they're in Sao Paulo, they can take it at their rate. And those people are reaching out to each other and forming their own online communities. So what I'm seeing is a bubbling up of people learning about the issues, learning about the laws, and then creating change themselves. Like Everett Chinoda went back to Zimbabwe and started an organization, and now she is reaching out to all of Africa. Gladys Samanyahu went back to Uganda, and she's a magistrate on a wildlife trafficking court. She took what we taught her, and she's doing all kinds of amazing things. And that's happening in places all around. It's, people have gone back to Europe and they're spreading the word. And this is becoming an international movement of lawyers who want to change the way animals are treated. And they want to do it in their own countries.
Well, it seems like a great place to close to talk about those students that you work with and teach. There's some great media recommendations that Joyce has listed that we will link in the show notes. And also, if people are interested in getting more involved in the work with Joyce, obviously the Centre for Animal Law Studies teaches law students and lawyers, also in person, but it's through this online course that Joyce has spoken about today, which we will also link. And there's some volunteer opportunities there as well, but we'll link all of the website and everything in the show notes.
We also teach in what's called our MSL program. We teach activists, people who have never been to law school. So they're part of our program as well. So yeah, so check us out. Check out the MSL program for activists who want to learn how to use the law.
Yeah, amazing. Well, thanks so much, Joyce. Absolutely did not disappoint. I love hearing about all of the stories of those early cases and your journey. Obviously been such an incredible journey over the last 45 years and a well-earned title of the mother of animal law. Thanks so much for joining us, Joyce.
Thank you. Thank you for the work that you are both doing. You are my hope for the future.